blood dripped onto the pristine marble floor. Domenico gripped his weapon, kicking open the door to save his soft, innocent fiancée from what he assumed was a home invasion. Instead, he froze. There stood Rosa, holding a bloody syringe, towering over his weeping maid. His sweet sanctuary was dangerous. The snow over Chicago did nothing to wash away the blood that stained the streets of the Gold Coast. Domenico Bellini, the undisputed head of the Bellini Syndicate, sat in the back of his armored Cadillac Escalade, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. He was a man carved from violence, his reputation built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency and a cold, calculating mind. To the underworld, he was the devil of the Midwest, a man who had dismantled rival factions with terrifying precision. But tonight, the tension rolling off his broad shoulders had nothing to do with his own safety. It was all about her. Rosa Ricci. The mere thought of her name sent a possessive thrill through his dark heart. Their arrangement had started as a strategic alliance, a marriage brokered to pacify a rebellious faction in New York. Rosa was the daughter of a Brooklyn capo sent to Chicago as a bride. In the superficial, harsh world of mafia aristocracy, Rosa had been quietly dismissed by the cruel wives of his lieutenants. She was a plus-sized woman, possessing soft, generous curves and a quiet, unassuming demeanor. They whispered that she was too soft, too gentle, too heavy to stand beside a king like Domenico. They thought she was a liability. They were all fools. Domenico had taken one look at her soft, beautiful face, her deep brown eyes, and the defiant tilt of her chin, and he had fallen completely, irreversibly obsessed. To Domenico, Rosa was a goddess of warmth in his freezing world. He worshipped every inch of her, finding a profound, agonizing peace in her embrace. He spent his days destroying men, but he spent his nights on his knees before his queen, burying his face in her lap, letting her soft hands stroke his hair. He shielded her from everything. He made sure she never saw the guns, never smelled the gunpowder, and never knew the true extent of the monsters that lurked outside their penthouse doors. Lately, however, those monsters had been getting too close. Preston Stahl. The name tasted like poison in Domenico's mouth. Preston was a ruthless operator from the West Coast, a man with ties to corrupt federal agents and a massive private military force. Preston had been pushing into territory for 6 months, trying to seize control of the illegal arms shipments coming through the Great Lakes. The war had been bloody and exhausting. Just an hour ago, Domenico had survived a targeted car bomb outside a downtown warehouse. The hit had failed, leaving 3 of Preston Stahl's mercenaries dead on the pavement. But the close call had rattled the impenetrable boss. He had to get home. He had to see Rosa. He needed to bury himself in her softness and reassure himself that the only pure thing in his life was safe. The Escalade pulled into the secure underground garage of his high-rise building. Domenico did not wait for his driver to open the door. He stepped out into the damp concrete air, his dark overcoat billowing behind him, his hand instinctively resting on the cold steel of the customized pistol holstered at his waist. He bypassed his usual security detail, leaving his men in the lobby. He wanted no interruptions. He wanted to walk into his penthouse, find Rosa curled up on the velvet sofa with her books, and hold her until the adrenaline of the assassination attempt faded from his veins. The private elevator hummed as it ascended to the penthouse level. Domenico closed his eyes, picturing. She had complained about the winter chill that morning, wrapping herself in one of his oversized cashmere sweaters. She looked incredibly beautiful when she wore his clothes, her curves perfectly framed by the dark fabric. He had kissed her goodbye, promising to be home by midnight. It was only 8 in the evening. He was early. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Domenico stepped into the grand foyer of his home. The penthouse was silent. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the imported Italian marble and the modern art pieces that adorned the walls. He took off his coat, tossing it carelessly onto a chair. "Rosa!" he called out, his deep voice echoing slightly in the vast space. No answer. A flicker of unease ignited in his chest. Rosa was always waiting for him. She usually had classical music playing, or the television murmuring in the background. The absolute silence was wrong. The paranoia that kept him alive in the syndicate screamed that something was out of place. He moved silently down the hallway, the thick carpets absorbing the sound of his footsteps. He checked the master bedroom. Empty. The library. Empty. The unease morphed into a cold, sharp dread. Had Preston Stall's men bypassed the building's security? Had they reached her? Then he heard it. A muffled sound coming from the rear of the penthouse, near the servants' quarters and the secondary kitchen. It sounded like a whimper, followed by a sharp, authoritative voice. A voice he knew intimately, yet sounded completely foreign in its tone. It was Rosa. Domenico drew his weapon, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator, slipping down the back corridor. He approached the partially open door of the stainless steel prep kitchen. The scent of bleach and something sharp, almost metallic, hung in the air. He gripped the handle, prepared to slaughter anyone who dared to threaten his fiancée. He pushed the door open, his gun raised, ready to unleash hell. Domenico froze. The breath hitched in his throat, his finger stalling on the trigger. The scene before him shattered every illusion he had ever built around the woman he loved. He did not find a helpless, terrified victim. He did not find Preston Stall's men holding her hostage in the center of the sterile, brightly lit kitchen, bound tightly to a heavy oak chair with industrial zip ties, was Maria. Maria was the sweet, middle-aged maid who had worked for Domenico for 3 years, a woman he had trusted to manage the household and serve their meals. Currently, Maria was weeping hysterically, a nasty bruise blooming across her left cheekbone, her uniform torn at the shoulder. Standing over her was Rosa. Domenico could not process the image. His beautiful, soft, plus-sized angel was wearing her cashmere sweater, but over it she had tied a thick, translucent plastic apron. Her hands were encased in black latex gloves. In her right hand, she held a small, gleaming surgical scalpel. Her face, usually so warm and expressive, was a mask of terrifying glacial indifference. Standing next to Rosa was her childhood best friend, Elena, who had flown in from New York for the week. Elena was casually leaning against the marble countertop, sipping a glass of red wine, a suppressed pistol resting casually near her elbow. Domenico stood paralyzed in the doorway, completely unnoticed by the 3 women in the room. His brain struggled to reconcile the soft woman who cried during romantic movies with the ruthless interrogator standing before him. Rosa leaned down, bringing her face inches from Maria's. When she spoke, her voice was not the gentle whisper Domenico adored. It was a razor-edged command that sent shivers down his spine. "I am going to ask you one more time, Maria," Rosa said, her tone conversational but laced with lethal intent. "And I want you to understand that my patience, much like your lifespan, is currently running very short. How long have you been passing our schedules to Preston Stahl?" Domenico's blood ran cold. Preston Stahl. How did Rosa even know that name? He had meticulously scrubbed all mention of his syndicate wars from their home. Maria sobbed violently, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're talking about, Miss Rosa. I swear on the Virgin Mary, I am just a maid. Please, you're crazy." Rosa sighed, standing up straight. She looked disappointed. Not angry, just coldly disappointed. It was a look Domenico had seen on the faces of the most hardened mob enforcers. "Elena," Rosa murmured, snapping her fingers once. Elena set down her wine glass, picked up a thick manila folder from the counter, and tossed it onto Maria's lap. The folder spilled open, revealing glossy photographs and bank statements. Rosa tapped the documents with the flat side of the scalpel. "You see, Maria, you made a very amateur mistake. You assumed because I am fat, because I spend my days baking and arranging flowers, that I am stupid. You looked at Domenico shielding me and thought I was a naive little doll. You forgot where I come from." Rosa began to pace slowly around the bound woman. "My father was the chief accountant and counterintelligence officer for the largest syndicate in Brooklyn. I didn't just bake cookies in my youth, Maria. I hunted rats. I know how to read offshore financial ledgers better than I know how to read a recipe book." Domenico stood silently in the shadows, his gun slowly lowering to his side. His heart was hammering. But it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from an overwhelming, intoxicating surge of awe. 2 weeks ago, Rosa continued, her voice echoing off the stainless steel, I noticed a discrepancy in the household supply accounts. A blind drop payment routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company that, after 3 days of digging, I traced back to a holding firm owned by Preston Stahl. The payments coincided perfectly with the days Domenico's roots were inexplicably ambushed. Maria choked on a sob, her eyes widening in absolute terror. The maid realized she was not dealing with a pampered mafia wife. She was dealing with a predator. Then Rosa stopped pacing and leaned in close again. "Today, Domenico called me from the road. He said he had a close call, a car bomb. He said he was coming home early. And what did I find you doing, Maria? I found you hovering over his evening Scotch decanter, with this." Eleanor produced a small, unmarked glass vial from her pocket and held it up to the light. "Digitalis," Rosa said softly. "Tasteless, odorless, induces a massive heart attack. It leaves the system quickly, making it look like the stressful life of a mob boss simply caught up with him. A brilliant plan by Preston Stahl. Remove the head of the Bellini family without firing a bullet in his home." Rosa pressed the flat of the scalpel gently against Maria's cheek. "You were going to kill the man I love. You brought the war into my sanctuary, into my home." "Unmade me!" Maria screamed, breaking down completely, tears and snot running down her face. "Stahl's men. They have my brother. They said if I didn't poison the boss tonight, they would send my brother to me in pieces. I had no choice, Miss Rosa, please." Rosa's expression did not soften. There was no pity in her dark eyes. "Everyone has a choice, Maria. You chose to betray the family that fed you. You chose to threaten my future husband. And in this world, choices have consequences." Domenico stepped out of the shadows. The sound of his heavy leather shoes on the tile caused all 3 women to snap their attention toward the door. Elena instinctively reached for her suppressed pistol, but relaxed when she saw him. Maria let out a wail of absolute despair, knowing that if Rosa was terrifying, the devil of the Midwest would be her end. But Domenico didn't look at the maid. He didn't look at Elena. His dark, intense gaze was locked entirely on Rosa. Rosa froze. For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed her beautiful features. The cold, calculating mafia princess vanished, replaced instantly by the woman who was terrified of disappointing him. She dropped the scalpel onto the counter with a loud clatter. She looked down at her plastic apron, her latex gloves, and the bound woman. "Domenico," Rosa whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You're home early. I can explain. I didn't want you to see this. I wanted to handle it before you got back." Domenico slowly holstered his weapon. He walked across the kitchen, ignoring the sobbing traitor tied to the chair. He stopped inches from Rosa. He looked at the discarded scalpel, the offshore bank statements, and the vial of poison. He had spent months treating her like fragile glass. He had hidden his world from her, terrified that the darkness inside him would frighten her away. He had thought her soft curves and gentle smile meant she was too delicate for the blood and the violence. He reached out, his large, rough hands gently grasping her waist. He pulled her against his chest, feeling the frantic beating of her heart. "You tracked a Cayman Islands shell corporation to Preston Stall?" Domenico asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Rosa nodded nervously, looking down at his chest. "Yes. I recognized the routing protocols my father used to flag. I'm sorry, Domenico. I know you wanted me to stay out of the family business. I know you want me to be good." Domenico let out a harsh, breathy laugh. He reached up, taking her face in his hands, forcing her to look into his dark eyes. What she saw there wasn't anger or disgust. It was a blazing, unholy adoration. "Rosa," he murmured, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "I have never been more fascinated by you in my entire life." Domenico leaned down, pressing a fervent, lingering kiss to Rosa's forehead, then down to her cheek, uncaring of the stark kitchen lighting or the whimpering maid tied to the chair. His massive hands, which had choked the life out of hardened hitmen, were incredibly gentle as they unknotted the plastic apron at her waist. He slid the protective covering off her plush, beautiful curves, discarding it on the floor. Next, he took her hands. He carefully peeled the black latex gloves from her fingers, one by one. When her hands were bare, he brought her knuckles to his lips, kissing the soft skin with a reverence that made the breath catch in her throat. "I thought I had to protect you from the monsters," Domenico murmured, his voice a dark, intoxicating rumble. "I thought my world would taint you. But you were born in this dark, weren't you, my sweet Rosa? You just hid your claws so beautifully." Rosa looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face for any sign of disgust or rejection. She found only a burning, possessive pride. The heavy weight that had rested on her chest since she discovered the betrayal finally dissolved. She had expected a scolding. She had expected him to lock her away in a gilded cage. Instead, he was looking at her like she was the true boss of the Chicago outfit. "I didn't want to be a monster, Domenico," she confessed quietly, resting her soft palms against his chest, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath his tailored shirt. "In Brooklyn, my father trained me to find the leaks, to plug the holes in the family business. But when I came to you, I just wanted to be your peace. I wanted our home to be safe." "It is safe," he promised, wrapping a heavy arm around her shoulders and pulling her flush against his side. And you are my peace. But you are also a Ricci, and you are going to be a Bellini. You are my queen, and a queen has every right to execute a traitor in her own castle. Eleanor, who had been watching the exchange with a raised eyebrow, let out a low whistle. "Well," she drawled, pouring herself another splash of wine. "I guess the wedding is still on." "Good. I already bought my dress." Domenico finally turned his attention to Maria. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the dead, freezing gaze of the devil of the Midwest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maria shrank back against the heavy oak chair, her sobs devolving into pathetic, breathless hiccups. "Domenico," Rosa said softly, her hand resting on his forearm. She said, "Preston Stahl's men have her brother. That is why she agreed to poison the Scotch." Domenico tilted his head, studying the maid as if she were an insect on the pavement. "Is that true, Maria? Or is that just the lie you spun to save your own miserable life when my fiancé caught you red-handed?" "It is true, I swear on my life, Mr. Bellini," Maria pleaded, her voice hoarse. "They took him 2 days ago. They told me to do this tonight, and then call a burner number to confirm it was done. They said if I did that, they would let him go." Domenico looked at Rosa. The unspoken communication between them was instant and flawless. If Maria had a burner number to contact Stahl's crew, they had a direct line to the men who had just tried to blow him up on the street. "Where is the phone?" Domenico demanded. "In my apron pocket," Maria cried, nodding her head toward the coat rack by the servant entrance. Eleanor walked over, dug into the pocket, and pulled out a cheap, disposable cell phone. She tossed it to Domenico. He caught it effortlessly, turning it over in his large hands. "You are going to call them," Domenico instructed, his tone devoid of any emotion. "You are going to tell them that the deed is done. You will say I came home, drank the scotch, and collapsed. You will demand to know where to pick up your brother." Maria nodded frantically, fresh tears streaming down her bruised face. "Yes. Yes, I will do whatever you want. Please just let me live." Domenico dialed the only number saved in the phone's memory and held it up to Maria's ear. The room was dead silent, save for the faint ringing echoing from the tiny speaker. On the third ring, a gruff voice answered. "Yeah?" "It is me," Maria choked out, looking terrified as Domenico pressed the phone closer. "It is done." He drank it. He is on the floor. He is not breathing. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low, cruel chuckle. "Good work, Maria. Didn't think you had the stomach for it." "Where is my brother?" she demanded, a surprising note of anger piercing through her fear. "You promised." "Relax. Hires at the old shipyard on Navy Pier, Warehouse Section 4. You can come get him. But if you bring the cops, or if Bellini's men are with you, we put a bullet in his head. Understand?" "I understand," she whispered. The line went dead. Domenico pulled the phone away and crushed it in his fist, the plastic casing snapping into jagged pieces that fell to the tile floor. He looked at Elena. "Call my men in the lobby. Tell them to come up and secure this room. Maria does not leave this chair until I return. If she moves, shoot her in the leg." Eleanor smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "With pleasure." Domenico turned back to Rosa. His gaze softened the moment it landed on her face. "I have to go," he said quietly. "Preston Stahl's lieutenants are at the shipyard. If I take them alive, I can find out exactly where Stahl is hiding." Rosa stepped closer, her soft curves pressing against him. Her heart was racing, but her mind was completely clear. "Let me come with you," she said. Domenico shook his head, his hands instantly coming up to cup her face. "Absolutely not. It will be a bloodbath, Rosa. I will not have you in the crossfire. You did your part beautifully. You saved my life tonight. Now let me do what I do best." Rosa knew better than to push him on this. She saw the absolute, unyielding protectiveness in his eyes. He would burn Chicago to the ground before he let her walk into a firefight. She reached up, wrapping her arms around his thick neck, pulling him down for a deep, desperate kiss. It tasted of adrenaline and unspoken promises. "Bring me his head," she whispered against his lips. Domenico smiled, a dark, terrifying smirk that would have sent any other person running for their life. "For you, my queen, I will bring you his entire empire." The icy wind off Lake Michigan whipped brutally through the abandoned shipyard at Navy Pier. Domenico stood in the shadows of a towering, rust-covered crane, flanked by 20 of his most lethal enforcers. They were armed with suppressed automatic rifles and dressed in tactical black, silent phantoms, ready to execute the wrath of the Bellini syndicate. Domenico checked the magazine of his customized pistol, the metallic click swallowed by the howling wind. His mind was a hyper-focused machine, calculating angles, entry points, and kill zones. But underneath the cold, tactical exterior, his blood was boiling. Preston Stahl had tried to kill him, which was business. But Stahl had infiltrated his home, threatening the sanctity of his life with Rosa. That was a death sentence. Warehouse Section 4 loomed ahead, a massive corrugated steel structure with a single flickering light above the side entrance. Domenico gave a subtle hand signal. His men moved like a synchronized wolf pack, fanning out to cover the perimeter. Domenico did not wait in the back. He led the breach. His men blew the reinforced hinges off the side door with localized shaped charges. The steel door collapsed inward with a deafening crash, followed instantly by the staccato popping of suppressed gunfire. Domenico stepped into the warehouse, stepping over the body of a guard before the man even hit the ground. The interior was vast, filled with stacked shipping containers that created a labyrinth of shadows. At the far end, under a bank of industrial halogen lights, stood 5 of Preston Stahl's heavily armed mercenaries. Bound to a support pillar nearby was a young man, beaten and bloodied. Maria's brother. The mercenaries scrambled for their weapons, shouting in panic as the Bellini enforcers swarmed the floor. But they were entirely outmatched. Domenico moved with terrifying precision. He raised his pistol, firing 3 shots in rapid succession. 3 mercenaries dropped, hollow-point rounds taking them perfectly in the center of mass. The remaining 2 tried to dive behind a shipping container, laying down suppressing fire. Domenico did not flinch. He walked forward, his posture rigid, his face an emotionless mask of impending death. His men flanked the container, flung the mercenaries out. When they broke cover, Domenico ended them without breaking his stride. The warehouse fell eerily silent, the smell of cordite and copper hanging heavy in the freezing air. Domenico walked up to the young man tied to the pillar. The boy was shaking violently, his eyes wide with terror as he looked at the bodies littering the concrete floor. Domenico pulled a combat knife from his tactical vest and sliced the thick ropes binding the boy's wrists. "You are Maria's brother," Domenico stated, his voice flat. The boy nodded frantically, rubbing his raw wrists. "Yes." "Oh my God, they were going to kill me." "Thank you." "Do not thank me." Domenico replied coldly. My fiancée showed mercy to your sister. That is the only reason you are drawing breath right now. Get out of here. One of my men will take you to a safe house until this war is over. As the boy was escorted away, Domenico's lead enforcer, a scarred man named Luca, approached. Boss, Luca said, gesturing to the dead men. We checked their pockets. One of them had this. Luca handed Domenico a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. The screen was illuminated with a single unread text message. Message read, Target confirmed deceased, awaiting extraction at the Adler hangar. Stahl. A feral, triumphant smile touched the corners of Domenico's mouth. Preston Stahl was waiting at a private hangar near Midway Airport, preparing to flee the city now that he thought the deed was done. He had underestimated the devil of the Midwest. More importantly, he had underestimated the soft, plus-sized woman waiting in the penthouse. Load up, Domenico ordered, his voice echoing off the steel walls. We are going to the airport. An hour later, the private hangar at the Adler facility was a slaughterhouse. Preston Stahl's elite security detail never saw it coming. Domenico's men hit the hangar from 3 sides, overwhelming the guards in less than 4 minutes of intense, brutal combat. Domenico walked through the carnage, his expensive overcoat ruined with blood that did not belong to him. He found Preston Stahl cowering behind a customized private jet, clutching a gold-plated revolver. Stahl was a wealthy, arrogant man from the West Coast who treated the Mafia like a corporate, hostile takeover. He had no understanding of the blood and loyalty that ruled Chicago. Stahl raised his gun, his hands shaking so badly he could barely keep it aimed. "Stay back, Bellini," he screamed, his polished veneer completely shattered. "I have federal agents on my payroll. If you kill me, they will dismantle your entire operation." Domenico did not slow down. He stepped into Stahl's personal space, swatting the gold-plated revolver away with effortless, brutal force, breaking Stahl's wrist in the process. Stahl shrieked in agony, dropping to his knees on the slick concrete. Domenico looked down at the pathetic man. "You sent a maid to do a man's job, Preston," Domenico said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You tried to poison me in my own home." Stahl cradled his broken wrist, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. "How did you know?" "The plan was perfect. It was untraceable." Domenico thought of Rosa, her soft curves wrapped in his sweater, holding a scalpel with the cold authority of a seasoned mob boss. He thought of her brilliant mind, seeing the trap that he had been too blind to notice. "My fiancée found your offshore accounts," Domenico said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "You thought you could bypass me. You thought my home was a weak point. But the woman you thought was just collateral damage is the smartest, most dangerous person in my empire." "Please," Stahl begged, tears leaking from his eyes. "I will give you everything. My roots, my contacts. Just let me leave Chicago." Domenico drew his customized pistol and pressed the hot barrel directly against the center of Stahl's forehead. "My queen asked for your head," Domenico whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "And I never deny her anything." The gunshot echoed through the hangar, signaling the absolute end of the West Coast invasion. Hours later, the Chicago sun began to rise, casting a pale, cold light over the frozen city. Domenico walked out of the private elevator and into his penthouse. He was exhausted, battered, and covered in the grim reality of his violent world. But as he stepped into the foyer, the scent of fresh coffee and warm vanilla washed over him, anchoring his soul. He found Rosa in the master bedroom. She was sitting in the center of their massive, king-sized bed, wearing his silk robe, looking like an absolute vision. She had stayed awake all night, waiting for him. When she saw him, she did not flinch at the blood on his clothes. She slid off the bed, her soft, bare feet padding across the plush carpet. She walked up to him, wrapping her warm, generous arms around his rigid torso, burying her face against his chest. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. Domenico dropped his weapon on the nightstand and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her completely into his embrace. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her sweet scent, feeling the crushing weight of the underworld lift from his shoulders. "It is done," he murmured against her skin. "The city is ours, and you are entirely mine." "Always," Rosa whispered, running her fingers through his dark hair. He picked her up, carrying his brilliant, beautiful queen back to the bed, knowing that as long as he had her soft hands to guide him, no empire could ever stand against them. Did you love this dark mafia romance? If this gritty tale of loyalty, betrayal, and high-stakes underworld passion kept you on the edge of your seat, drop a like and share this video with your friends. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Rosa's shocking plot twist. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, suspenseful stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a gripping new upload.